I have to ask, though, Charles, the thing that Will Bunch is establishing in the Philadelphia Inquirer, that there's a through line from the 1870s Klan law to the appearance of Fred Trump at a Klan rally and the twisted presidency of Donald Trump. I mean, the idea that in this moment of crisis, Trump chooses to focus on what he calls racism in reverse, which is black prosecutors going after a white man, right? That's more than just political sloganeering. That is saying the quiet part out loud about who Donald Trump is speaking to, and I think to some degree what he wants them to do, which is focus on the blackness and focus anger in turn on that blackness.
Well, Alex, it is a full-throated yell to white nationalists across the country. And it's very important that we distinguish between white nationalism and sort of white supremacy. White nationalism is extremely specific in that it refers to the notion that there are people who are not white who should not be allowed to run or even participate in the civic processes that our democracy is based on. And that's why it's so important to have this conversation, because of who he's attacking and where they're positioned with respect to this process. He's attacking district attorneys. He's attacking legislators. He's attacking people who are basically at the helm of upholding our democratic institutions and at the helm of upholding these laws. And also what he's at the same time doing is basically suggesting that it's okay, Alabama, if you are disenfranchising literally thousands of black American voters by defying what the Supreme Court has said. That is all white nationalist rhetoric. It is not a dog whistle. It is a bullhorn. And it's important to understand that that's exactly who he's appealing to.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when the idea that, the Alabama congressional delegation may be literally disenfranchising people of color would be reason for a presidential candidate to be like, hey, maybe don't go down there and accept the unilateral endorsement of that very same congressional delegation.
Right, but if you think about the fact that Donald Trump is now running to stay out of prison, and if you think about what he's been the laws and norms that he's been willing to smash just in order to get into power, and what he's going and the people that he's going to need to disenfranchise if he has any hope of winning this next election. I mean, I feel like the gloves have never been on, but they are really off now in terms of what he's going to be willing to do in 2024.
I do wonder, Charles, if I'm overstating the case here, but it's interesting to me that he's called Fonnie Willis a racist. He's called Alvin Bragg racist and an animal. He's called Tish James racist and peekaboo. He's talking about racism in reverse. Jack Smith is a white man, right? So I don't think the racism in reverse applies to Jack Smith. He's not talked about Jack Smith's race. He calls him deranged. To me, there's a difference. When Trump shouts out the racism that he sees the black prosecutors as being guilty of, that almost calls for a rebalancing of the scales from Trump supporters. Whereas calling Jack Smith deranged is sort of like, don't listen to what that guy's saying. I mean, I don't know whether it's going too far to say. I almost hear violence in the calling of black prosecutors racist, whereas I don't hear it in the same way when he talks about Jack Smith.
There is no almost, and I think it's important to understand that that is very much so out of the white nationalist playbook, because part of it is a suggestion that not only are you not qualified, but then there's a sort of dehumanizing element of what those remarks do to someone who is in a position of authority. Yeah. That's very intentional. This is not by accident. This is not a mistake. Donald Trump is very clear about what he's doing and who he's appealing to. The other thing that makes this more interesting, and you just sort of referenced this, is that he is now running to stay out of jail. And so he's doubling down almost in a space of desperation to try to avoid what is inevitably coming with respect to convictions in one of these cases. Expect that these attacks are going to contain additional vitriol. Expect that they are going to contain additional hints around violence that are going to get louder and louder. And this is why you have a judge making the sort of boundaries that you do as part of his arraignment, because we all can see where this is heading. We know what this is and we know where it's going. We've seen this movie before and we know how it ends. The part of the problem is that
we've seen like part one of this movie.
Right,
We're now in the turbocharged like sequel to it.
This is the Fast and Furious franchise of politics in 2023. I think it's important to understand that part of the reason we got here is because we did not call it out for what it was back when in 2015 when we saw it for the first time. We did not label it was. These things have not occurred in a vacuum, Alex, and so it's important to understand right now it is critical that we bear no bones about labeling these things for what they are in terms of the deep anti-blackness and racism that are shrouding all of these remarks around these prosecutors that Donald Trump is making.
All part of a trajectory.